Let's start with a film almost everyone has seen, The Truman Show. A man named Truman Burbank lives a seemingly perfect life in a beautiful, safe island town. He has a loving wife, a good job, a best friend. But the sky has a strange habit of dropping stage lights, and sometimes the radio accidentally tunes into the production crew directing his every move. Truman's entire reality, he slowly discovers, is a television set. He isn't held by bars or chains, but by a world meticulously crafted to keep him there. A world that uses his own fears, like his terror of open water, as the most effective walls imaginable. The prison wasn't just around him. In a way, it was built inside him. The architecture of everything now. Take that idea and zoom out from one man's life to our own. We've been trained to see power as something solid, something held. A crown on a king's head, a gavel in a judge's hand, a politician behind a podium. But what if real power isn't a thing at all? What if it's more like gravity, an invisible, constant force that has no single source but shapes the path of everything around us? It's in the design of a classroom that seats everyone to face a single point of authority. It's in a doctor's diagnosis that draws the line between what is considered healthy and what is sick. This power doesn't just tell you no. Its true function is far more subtle and far more creative. The blueprint of you. This system's real genius isn't in what it forbids, but in what it produces. It produces truth. It produces knowledge. And most critically, it produces a certain kind of person. The good student, the productive employee, the law-abiding citizen. Think about the curated world of your social media feed. That algorithm isn't a neutral window onto the world. It's an instrument of power that learns your hopes, your anxieties, and your beliefs. It then builds a reality tailored specifically to keep you engaged, to shape your desires, to mold your identity with every click and every share. It isn't just censoring reality. It's actively constructing the one you experience, making you a willing partner in your own conditioning. Managing the flock. This brings us to one of the most advanced forms of control. Governments learned long ago that ruling by pure force is clumsy and often creates rebellion. It is far more efficient to govern through a kind of managed freedom. The state acts less like a king issuing commands and more like a shepherd managing a flock. We saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. We weren't, for the most part, forced into our homes by armed guards. Instead, we were guided by a storm of data, expert advice, and public health messaging to take on the burden of responsibility ourselves. We became managers of our own biology, entrepreneurs of our own health, all for the supposed good of the population. This logic is now everywhere, turning life itself into a project of endless self-optimization to better serve the needs of the system. Finding the cracks. This vision of the world can feel utterly hopeless, as if we are all just marionettes dancing on strings we can't even see. But here is the crucial insight. Where there is power, there is always resistance. Because this power isn't a solid top-down structure, but a shifting, messy web of relationships, it is full of friction, tension, and weakness. And in that tension, there are always openings. Resistance isn't always a heroic charge against the barricades. It can be found in the quiet refusal to be neatly categorized, in the creation of new ways of seeing the world, and in the small, collective acts that challenge what everyone else has agreed is normal. The same system that builds the prison walls also, unintentionally, gives us the tools to map its weaknesses, to find its cracks, and, maybe, to start building a way out. To really understand how this works, picture a truly strange piece of architecture, a design from the 18th century. Imagine a prison built in a perfect circle, a ring of cells all facing inward, and at the very heart of it all, a single guard tower. From this central point, a guard could, in theory, see into any cell at any time. But the trick is, the inmates can't see the guard. They live in a state of permanent uncertainty, never knowing if a pair of eyes is on them at this exact moment. Only that it could be. The result? The prisoners start to police their own behavior. They act as if they are constantly watched, just in case. They become their own jailers. Now, it's easy to dismiss this as a chilling historical footnote, a blueprint for a building thankfully never mass-produced. But what if the walls of that prison were not made of brick and mortar, but of light and code? Think about the digital stage we all live on. Every photo you post, every opinion you share, every little glimpse into your life is broadcast to an invisible audience. Who's watching? Is it your friends, your family, that future employer you haven't even met yet? Or is it just the cold, calculating eye of an algorithm logging another data point about your preferences? Because you know you're potentially visible, you begin to self-edit. You curate your reality. You carefully craft an image. You adjust your own thoughts and behaviors to match what you think that invisible audience wants. The most brilliant and terrifying part is that the guard tower doesn't even need to be staffed. The mere possibility of being seen is enough. We are the inmate, but we are also our own warden, constantly performing for a crowd we can't even be sure is there. This is how true power operates, not as a chain or a locked door, but as an internalized gaze that encourages us to meticulously build our own cage. Take a look at the world of modern medicine. We see a new drug approved with billion-dollar fanfare, and we're told it's a triumph of objective science, a victory for humanity. But is it really that this particular disease was the most scientifically interesting or the most devastating one to solve? Or is it that what we even get to call knowledge is shaped by the institutions that fund the research? The corporations and governments who decide which questions are worth asking and which answers will be profitable. The line between what is true and what is powerful begins to disappear entirely. Knowledge and power are two sides of the same coin. Power requires a body of knowledge to justify its actions, and that knowledge is what gives power its legitimacy and its tools. Think about the history you learned in school, the narrative it weaves, the heroes it creates, and more importantly, the entire civilizations and points of view it completely ignores. That curriculum wasn't an accident. It reflects the priorities of those who get to write the story. Think of how, just a few centuries ago, the medical field started to meticulously define and classify what it meant to be insane. This wasn't just a simple mission to understand the human mind. It was the creation of a category. This knowledge gave a group of people the authority to build asylums, to confine others, to draw a hard line between the normal and the abnormal, and in doing so, exercise total control over those who didn't fit. You can see this playing out today in the silent hierarchies of our world. How about the person whose rare condition is ignored for decades, whose suffering doesn't fit a neat, profitable category? They aren't just unlucky. They are living in a silence manufactured by a system that decided their reality wasn't a priority for knowledge creation. The energy that could have been used to understand their truth was simply pointed elsewhere, not because of some evil plot, but because the system itself is built this way. The blueprint for what we accept as fact is drawn by an invisible hand, and that hand is always holding the levers of power. Imagine a world where your life was measured not by the minute, but by the sun and the seasons, your work defined by the task at hand. Then, a new sound splits the air, the factory whistle, and suddenly, your day is no longer your own. It's a thing to be dissected into precise, identical segments, managed by someone with a stopwatch. This wasn't the brute power of a king demanding tribute. This was something quieter, more intimate, and far more interested in your efficiency than your loyalty. See, the true masterstroke of this system wasn't that it controlled people, but that it produced them. In the mid-1970s, the thinker Michel Foucault saw that this new kind of power doesn't just restrain you, it actively shapes you through a set of subtle, brilliant techniques. There's the constant surveillance, that foreman's gaze you can always feel on your back. There is the normalizing judgment, where you are perpetually measured against an ideal, the perfect worker, the A student, and found either adequate or lacking. And then there is the examination, that moment where both surveillance and judgment come together to classify, measure, and ultimately define you. The entire goal was to create what Foucault would call docile bodies, souls that were not merely obedient, but profoundly useful and productive. And if this entire blueprint feels hauntingly familiar, it's because you've lived inside a version of it. Think of the modern school. The rigid timetables, the rows of desks, the ceaseless evaluations. It is the refined, domesticated successor to the factory floor. It's a system designed not simply to teach you algebra or history, but to teach you how to be a certain kind of person, one who shows up on time, follows instructions without question, and respects the schedule above all else. The ultimate victory of this power, its final move in the game, is when the manager and the foreman are no longer needed. Because you have already learned to place one inside your own head. Think about the basic pillars of modern society. Public health initiatives, sanitation systems that brought an end to plagues, the sheer fact that we live longer, healthier lives. It seems like an obvious sign of progress, a clear win for humanity. Who would argue against that? But then you have to start asking some uncomfortable questions. When exactly did the state get a subscription to your biological data? Was there a coordinated wave of goodwill that swept the globe in the 19th century? Or did the very rules of power get a quiet, system-wide update? And if you engineer a healthier, more productive, longer-living population, who is the final customer for all that optimized life? It's like the game completely changed. Imagine power stopped being a brutal game of chess, where the goal is to violently capture individual pieces and checkmate a king. Instead, it became a grand, sprawling game of SimCity. In this new game, you don't win by executing disobedient citizens. You win by meticulously managing the entire system, the hospitals, the water pipes, the birth rates, to ensure the population as a whole thrives and grows. You're no longer wielding a sword over a single subject. You're exercising a power over the entire species. This is the monumental shift that Foucault pinpointed. The game was no longer about the sovereign's right to take your life, but about the social body's right to guarantee its own survival and strength. Think of a census taker, not as a nosy neighbor, but as an agent gathering data to better manage the collective. Think of a vaccination campaign, not just as good medical advice, but as a strategy to build a more resilient and efficient workforce. The old power made a show of the spectacular moment of death. This new power operates in the quiet hum of a spreadsheet, the cold data of a mortality table, and the calculated administration of life itself. The question is no longer, can I kill you? But how can I make you live in a way that best serves the system? I can imagine a lot of people hearing this and thinking, what are you talking about? I'm in charge of my life. I make my own choices. And on the surface, that feels completely true. We choose our careers, we choose what we eat, we choose how to spend our money. This isn't about some cartoon villain in a volcano lair with a big red button that controls your mind. The reality is far more sophisticated. It's a kind of control that works by shaping the world around you, arranging the very options you have to choose from, so that your free choice just so happens to line up perfectly with what the system needed you to do all along. But let's pause for a second and really ask, who drew the map? Who decided a mountain of debt was the price of admission for a good education? Was that just an accident of history? Who turned your health into a full-time job, making you the entrepreneur of your own body, constantly tracking your sleep, your steps, your macros, as if you're managing a high-stakes startup called You Incorporated? And when you're encouraged to be the CEO of your own life, you gotta ask, who built the boardroom you're sitting in? Who really benefits when the crushing weight of making it in this world, or failing, is placed entirely on your shoulders and not on the design of the game itself? Think about it like an orchestra conductor. It's a powerful image. The conductor doesn't play a single note. They don't touch an instrument. They make no sound themselves, yet they are the source of the entire symphony. They set the stage, they pick the music, they dictate the tempo, and they guide every player to create one cohesive sound. In the same way, this invisible art of governance shapes the very rules of our lives. It governs from a distance, setting up the conditions so that we become the willing instruments of our own regulation. And here's the most brilliant, maybe even the most unsettling part. We often feel the most free, the most empowered, when we are playing our assigned part in that symphony flawlessly.